The phone lit up on the edge of the hotel bed, vibrating hard against the sheets. Charlotte's name glowing in the dim, city-lit suite. Julian glanced at it, just long enough to know who he was ignoring, before pulling Lexi deeper into his lap. "Forget it," she whispered against his mouth, tracing the tattoos on his chest. "Your wife can wait." And he let it ring. But while Julian Cross, Chicago's most feared kingmaker, lost himself in the heat of a woman who wasn't his wife, Charlotte wasn't calling about dinner plans or checking in. She was calling because their 6-year-old son had just been rushed into emergency surgery after a catastrophic car accident. And in that moment of choosing desire over duty, Julian Cross, the most feared mafia boss in the city, had just lost everything that truly mattered. Welcome to Empire Stories. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Charlotte Cross stood in the emergency room hallway, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her pale face. Her son's blood still stained the sleeve of her cream cashmere sweater, the one Julian had bought her last Christmas in another one of his guilt-driven shopping sprees. 6 years of marriage to Julian Cross had given her everything money could buy. The penthouse overlooking the city, the private security, the designer wardrobe. But it had slowly stolen everything her heart needed: his presence, his attention, his partnership in building the life they'd promised each other. She pressed redial again, her thumb trembling over Julian's name. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Again. "This is Cross. Leave a message." The mechanical sound of his voice made her want to scream. Where was he? Adrian was in surgery, their baby boy who still slept with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, who'd begged Julian to come to his soccer game last week, the game Julian had missed for a business meeting. The sound of the hospital doors sliding open made her spin around, hope flaring desperately in her chest. But it wasn't Julian. Just another family rushing toward another crisis. She heard the surgeon's voice still echoing in her mind from 20 minutes ago. "We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Cross, but the next few hours are critical. Is your husband on his way?" Charlotte's heart clenched. She nodded, lied, and said he was coming. But she knew Julian wasn't rushing to the hospital, because if he was, he would have answered. He always answered when it was truly important to him. Except she was beginning to realize she and Adrian hadn't been truly important to him for a very long time. She sank into one of the waiting room chairs, her phone clutched in both hands, and tried his number one more time. This time she'd leave a message he couldn't ignore. "Julian," her voice cracked, raw with fear and exhaustion. "Adrian's been in an accident. He's in surgery. They said—" She couldn't finish. The sob that had been building in her throat finally broke free. "I need you. Please, please come." She ended the call and stared at the phone, waiting, praying. Meanwhile, 15 blocks away, Julian Cross stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury hotel suite, watching the city lights shimmer below. His reflection stared back at him. A powerful man with sharp features, designer stubble perfectly maintained. His shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing the tattoos that told stories he'd never shared with Charlotte. 6 years of marriage had given him the stability he needed to build his empire, the legitimate front that made his underground operations possible. Charlotte had been perfect, elegant, intelligent, someone who understood the world he came from without demanding he change. But somewhere along the way, the weight of running an empire had become suffocating. The board meetings, the territory negotiations, the constant threat assessments, it all blurred together into a life that felt more like obligation than choice. Until Lexi. The sound of the shower stopping pulled his attention. Lexi emerged wrapped in a hotel robe, her dark hair wet against her shoulders, her smile dangerous and knowing. "You're thinking too much," she said, crossing to where he stood. "That's not what tonight is about." Julian's phone buzzed on the nightstand. The 4th call in 10 minutes, all from Charlotte. He glanced at it, then deliberately turned away. "Ignore it," Lexi whispered, her fingers finding the open collar of his shirt. "She can wait." And even though something deep in his gut told him this was different, That Charlotte never called this many times unless something was wrong, Julian silenced his instincts. He pulled Lexi closer, kissing her with the kind of intensity that came from a man trying to forget the life waiting for him outside this room. "You look tense, baby," Lexi murmured against his neck. "What's wrong?" Julian's expression softened as he looked at her. This woman who demanded nothing from him except this moment, who didn't care about his legacy or his empire, who let him be just a man instead of a king. "Nothing's wrong," he said, but even as he spoke, his phone buzzed again. Lexi's eyes flicked to the nightstand. "She's persistent tonight." "She always is," Julian said, his tone harder than he intended. "Charlotte doesn't understand that I can't drop everything every time she—" But his phone was ringing again, and this time something made him look. "Charlotte, Mobile." He stared at her name, his hand hovering over the device. For a heartbeat, he considered answering. But then Lexi's arms wrapped around him from behind, and her voice was honey in his ear. "Don't. Whatever it is, it can wait until morning. Tonight is ours." Julian looked at the phone one more time. Then he pressed decline and turned it face down on the nightstand. "You're right," he said, pulling Lexi toward the bed. "Business can wait." But as Julian lost himself in the arms of his mistress, he had no idea that his wife wasn't calling about business, or dinner plans, or any of the trivial things he'd convinced himself she bothered him about. Charlotte was calling because their son, the boy who had his eyes and his stubborn streak, was fighting for his life on an operating table. And in that single moment of choosing temporary pleasure over permanent responsibility, Julian Cross had just destroyed everything he'd built. The empire would survive. His marriage wouldn't. Charlotte had stopped counting how many dinners she'd eaten alone. The penthouse stretched around her like a beautiful prison. 12-foot ceilings, imported marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city that never stopped moving. Everything Julian's money could buy. Everything except the one thing she actually wanted, him. She stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the place settings for the third time. Candlelight flickered across the dining table she'd spent an hour preparing. Julian's favorite meal, ossobuco, the recipe his mother had taught her during their first year of marriage, when things were different, when he still came home. The pregnancy test burned like a secret in the pocket of her silk dress. 3 years of trying, of hoping, of monthly disappointments that Julian barely acknowledged between territory meetings and shipment schedules. And now, finally, a second line. A miracle she discovered alone in their marble bathroom, while he was wherever he always was these days. She'd texted him 4 hours ago, "Please come home for dinner tonight. It's important." His response had come 30 minutes later. "We'll try." Meeting running long, that was 2 hours ago. Charlotte poured herself water, no wine tonight, and sat at the table watching the candles burn lower. Adrian was already asleep upstairs, having asked again why Daddy missed his bedtime story. She'd run out of excuses that didn't make her son feel unimportant. The sound of the elevator arriving made her heart leap. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress, rehearsing the words she'd practiced all day. Julian emerged from the hallway, still in his black suit, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand making sharp gestures as he spoke. "I don't care what Martinez thinks. The deal happens on my terms, or it doesn't happen at all." He barely glanced at her as he crossed toward his office. "No, tomorrow. I'll handle it personally." "Julian," Charlotte called softly. He held up one finger. "Wait," without breaking stride. She stood there, watching him disappear into his office, the door clicking shut behind him. The ossobuco was getting cold. The candles had burned halfway down. The secret in her pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. When he finally emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was distracted, already somewhere else. "Sorry, baby," he said, kissing her cheek without really seeing her. "That smells amazing. You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Bunny." "I wanted to," Charlotte said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I have something to tell you." They sat down, and for exactly 4 minutes, it felt almost normal. Julian complimented the food, asked about Adrian, started to reach for her hand across the table. Then his phone rang. He started. "Please don't," Charlotte whispered, but he was already answering. "Cross, what is it?" She watched him stand, watched his face shift into that cold, calculating expression that belonged to Julian Cross, the Mafia boss. Not Julian Cross, her husband. Watched him mouth sorry as he walked toward the windows, his voice dropping to that dangerous tone that meant someone was about to have a very bad night. Charlotte sat alone at the table, her hand moving to her stomach, to the life growing inside her that Julian didn't know about. The life she'd wanted to celebrate with him. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When he finally returned, it was only to grab his keys. "I have to go handle something. Don't wait up." The door closed behind him before she could speak. Charlotte sat in the flickering candlelight, staring at the untouched meal, the empty chair, the life she'd built that somehow felt more lonely than being alone ever had. She pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket and set it on the table beside his plate. Then she ate dinner by herself, wondering when exactly her marriage had become a ghost story. Julian told Charlotte he was flying to New York for a territory negotiation. 3 days, he'd said, kissing her forehead absently while his driver loaded luggage into the black SUV. Important meetings couldn't be avoided. He was 20 minutes away at the Regency Hotel downtown. Room executive suite, registered under a name that didn't exist in any legal database. Lexi Hart stood by the window wearing nothing but his dress shirt, her dark hair catching the afternoon light as she laughed at something on her phone. 28 years old, art gallery owner, the kind of woman who collected beautiful things and asked no questions about where Julian's money came from. She was everything Charlotte wasn't. Uncomplicated, undemanding, content to exist in the stolen hours between his real life. "Come back to bed," she said without turning around. "We have the whole weekend." Julian watched her from where he lay tangled in expensive sheets, his tattooed chest rising and falling steadily. This wasn't love. He knew that. This was escape. From the weight of Adrian's questions about why Daddy was always working, from Charlotte's hurt silences, from the suffocating pressure of being Julian Cross every single moment of every single day. With Lexi, he could just be Marco. No empire, no legacy, no expectations. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Charlotte's name lit up the screen. He stared at it for 3 rings, then let it go to voicemail. "Your wife again?" Lexi asked, finally turning to face him. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "She'll leave a message if it's important." "And if it is important?" Julian sat up, reaching for the whiskey glass on the bedside table. "Then I'll call her back later." Lexi crossed the room and climbed onto the bed, straddling his lap. Her fingers traced the tattoo over his heart, a crown wrapped in thorns, the first ink he'd gotten when he took over his father's organization. "Do you ever think about leaving her?" The question came out softer than he expected, almost vulnerable. Julian's hands found her waist automatically. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer." "My family is my legacy, Lex. Adrian, Charlotte, they're part of who I am, what I've built." "So am I just your escape then?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes demanded honesty. "The place you run when real life gets too heavy?" Julian opened his mouth to deny it, to say something that would smooth this over. But the words wouldn't come because she was right, and they both knew it. His phone buzzed again. Charlotte, again. He reached over and silenced it without looking. Lexi watched him do it, something unreadable crossing her face. "You know what I think? I think you keep one foot in both worlds because you're too scared to fully commit to either one." That's not, you love control, Julian. The power of having everything exactly how you want it. A respectable wife at home, a passionate mistress in hotels, the perfect mafia king with the perfect double life. The accusation stung because somewhere beneath the defensive anger rising in his chest, he recognized the truth in it. His phone lit up a 3rd time. This time, a text from Charlotte appeared on the lock screen. "Please call me when you can. I really need to talk to you." Julian stared at it, his thumb hovering over the screen. Something in those words felt different, urgent, real. Then Lexi's mouth found his neck, and his phone screen went dark. And Julian Cross, the man who controlled an entire criminal empire through calculated decisions, made the worst choice of his life. He set the phone face down on the nightstand and pulled Lexi closer, choosing temporary pleasure over whatever Charlotte needed to tell him. Hit subscribe if you believe family should never come second to selfish pleasure. Only people who put their desires above their responsibilities won't subscribe. Don't be like Julian. Outside the hotel window, the city moved on, uncaring and relentless. And in a penthouse across town, Charlotte sat alone with her hand on her stomach, staring at her phone, waiting for a call that would never come. Adrian's small hand gripped Charlotte's tighter as they sat in Dr. Morrison's office, the sterile smell of antiseptic making her stomach turn. Her 6-year-old had been complaining about headaches for 2 weeks, sharp pains that made him cry at night, that no amount of children's Tylenol seemed to touch. "Mrs. Cross," De Morrison said gently, closing the file in front of her. "I want to be clear, this is most likely the stress-related. Children of Adrian's age can manifest anxiety through physical symptoms." Charlotte's throat tightened. Stress? He's 6 years old. Has there been any change in his home environment recently? Tension between parents? Changes in routine? The question landed like a punch. Charlotte thought about the empty chair at dinner tables, the nights Julian didn't come home until Adrian was asleep, the way her son asked less and less about Daddy because he'd learned disappointment was the only answer. "His father travels a lot for work," Charlotte said quietly. Dr. Morrison nodded knowingly. "I'd like to monitor him over the next month. Keep a headache journal. But Mrs. Cross, children are perceptive. They feel what we think we're hiding." In the car afterwards, Charlotte dialed Julian with shaking hands while Adrian dozed in his car seat. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Charlotte, kind of in the middle of something. Can this wait?" She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "Adrian's doctor thinks his headaches are from stress. We need to talk about stress. He's a kid. Kids get headaches." Julian's voice was distracted, distant. "Look, I'll call you back in an hour, okay? We'll figure it out." The line went dead before she could respond. Charlotte sat in the parking lot, staring at her phone, something cold settling in her chest. When was the last time Julian had actually listened to her? Really listened, not just waited for his turn to leave? That night, while putting away Julian's dry cleaning, she found it, a receipt folded in his jacket pocket. The Regency Hotel, room service, champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. Their tradition. The thing Julian had done on their very first date 7 years ago. The thing he still did every anniversary. But their anniversary was in March. This receipt was dated last Tuesday, the same night he'd texted her at 9 p.m. saying his meeting with the attorney was running late, that he'd grabbed dinner out. Charlotte's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and opened their joint banking account. She never checked it before, never had reason to. Julian handled their finances, but now she scrolled through transactions, her heart pounding harder with each entry. The Regency Hotel, 4 times in the last 2 months. Fiore's restaurant, the intimate Italian place where Julian had proposed. A jewelry purchase from Cartier she'd never received. Florist charges, hotel bars, late-night room service. All on nights when Julian said he was working. All at places that screamed romance, not business. Charlotte sat on the edge of their bed, the bed she increasingly slept in, alone, and stared at the receipt in her hand. Champagne and strawberries. Their thing. His thing with someone else. The pregnancy test she'd finally left on the bathroom counter 3 days ago sat untouched where she'd placed it. Julian hadn't mentioned it, hadn't asked, probably hadn't even seen it because he barely came into their bedroom anymore except to sleep. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Sorry, got tied up. We'll talk tomorrow about Adrian. Don't worry so much. Don't worry." Their son was manifesting physical pain from the stress of his father's absence. And Julian's response was, "Don't worry." Charlotte looked at the receipt again, then at the bank statement, then at the empty space beside her where her husband should be. And for the first time in 6 years of marriage, she let herself think the word she'd been avoiding. Affair. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Charlotte was folding laundry in the penthouse, Adrian's favorite dinosaur shirt in her hands, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Cross?" The woman's voice was professional but urgent. "This is Chicago Memorial Hospital. Your son Adrian was brought in by ambulance approximately 20 minutes ago. The shirt fell from Charlotte's hands. What? No, that's not. He's with his nanny. They were walking home from school. What happened? There was a car accident, ma'am. A vehicle ran a red light at the intersection of... Charlotte didn't hear the rest. She was already running for her keys, her purse, her phone. The world narrowed to a single thought. Get to Adrian. She called Julian from the elevator. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. She called again as her driver pulled into traffic. Voicemail. Again as they weaved through congested streets. Voicemail. Julian, Adrian's been hurt. We're at Chicago Memorial, please. Her voice cracked. Please answer your phone. The hospital emergency entrance was chaos, fluorescent lights too bright, the smell of disinfectant and fear thick in the air. A nurse led Charlotte through double doors to where Adrian lay small and broken on a gurney, his face pale, a breathing tube down his throat. Oh God, Charlotte whispered, her legs nearly giving out. Oh God, baby, I'm here. Mommy's here. A doctor appeared beside her, young and exhausted. Mrs. Cross, I'm Dr. Patel. Adrian has severe head trauma and internal bleeding. We've stabilized him for now, but we need to get him into surgery within the hour. Surgery? The word felt foreign in her mouth. The internal bleeding is significant, and there's swelling on his brain we need to address immediately. Dr. Patel's eyes were kind, but honest. I won't lie to you. The next few hours are critical. Is your husband on his way? Charlotte nodded automatically, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. 5 missed calls to Julian, all unanswered. She tried again. It rang once, twice, then declined. He'd sent her call to voicemail. Actively, deliberately. He's coming, Charlotte lied, her voice hollow. He's in a meeting. She stood in that hallway, watching nurses prep her son for emergency surgery, and called her husband again, and again, and again. Each time it rang just long enough for her to hope before going silent. 15 blocks away, Julian's phone vibrated insistently on Lexi's nightstand. He glanced at it, Charlotte's name lighting up the screen for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon. His jaw tightened with irritation. This was exactly why he needed these escapes. The constant calls, the needy texts, the way Charlotte couldn't just let him have a few hours of peace. She's relentless today, he muttered. Lexi traced her fingers across his tattooed shoulder. So ignore her. That's what the decline button is for. Julian stared at the phone. Some small voice in the back of his mind whispered that Charlotte never called this much unless something was actually wrong. But that voice was drowned out by 6 years of false alarms, dramatic calls about minor things, interruptions for problems that could have waited. The phone buzzed again. Julian reached over and declined the call. There, Lexi purred. Now where were we? She kissed him, and Julian let himself sink into it, into the simplicity of wanting nothing more than this moment. His phone buzzed twice more, calls, then a voicemail notification. He didn't check it. Back at the hospital, Charlotte stood in the hallway outside the operating room, mascara streaking down her face, her hands covered in her son's blood. The nanny sat nearby, sobbing into her hands, repeating, "He just ran into the street. I couldn't catch him. The car came out of nowhere." A nurse approached gently. "Mrs. Cross, we need you to sign the surgical consent forms." Charlotte's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the pen. Her signature came out jagged, broken. "Is there anyone we can call for you?" the nurse asked. "Family? Friends?" Charlotte looked at her phone. 7 unanswered calls to Julian. 3 voicemails she'd left, each one more desperate than the last. "No," she whispered. "There's no one." She sank into a plastic chair, wrapped her arms around herself, and finally let herself feel what she'd been denying for months. She was completely alone. Her son was fighting for his life behind those operating room doors, and her husband, the man who'd promised to protect their family above everything, wouldn't even answer her calls. Charlotte pulled out her phone one more time, her vision blurred with tears, and typed a text with trembling fingers. "Our son was hit by a car. He's in surgery. If you ever loved us, please come." She hit send and watched the message deliver. Then she waited and waited and waited. Comment family first. If you can't stand people like Julian, who ignore their wife's emergency calls while their child is dying, let's see who really understands what matters. The surgery light remained red. Her phone stayed silent. And Charlotte Cross learned exactly how little she mattered to the man she'd given everything to. Julian's key turned in the penthouse lock at 3:17 a.m. He was floating on expensive whiskey and the kind of reckless satisfaction that came from hours of pretending his real life didn't exist. The lights were off. Good. Charlotte would be asleep. He could shower, slip into bed, and deal with whatever she'd been calling about in the morning. But the penthouse wasn't just dark. It was empty. "Charlotte?" His voice echoed through marble hallways. No response. Adrian's room, empty, bed still made from this morning. Their bedroom untouched. Julian's buzz evaporated, replaced by something cold crawling up his spine. He found his head of security in the lobby. "Where's my wife?" Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. "Chicago Memorial, sir. She's been there since around 4 p.m. The words took a moment to register. "The hospital? Why the hell didn't anyone tell me?" "We tried, Mr. Cross, multiple times. You weren't answering." Julian's hand instinctively went to his phone. Dead battery, black screen. He'd silenced it hours ago and forgotten to check it. "What happened?" "Your son was in an accident, hit by a car near his school." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Julian's feet. "What? When is he?" "He's in surgery, has been for hours." Julian was moving before Marcus finished speaking, his heart hammering against his ribs. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and mounting panic. This couldn't be real. Adrian was fine. He was supposed to be fine. He burst through the emergency room doors at 3:45 a.m., still wearing the same clothes from his afternoon with Lexi, his hair disheveled, Lexi's perfume, that distinct jasmine scent, still clinging to his shirt collar. He found Charlotte in the surgical waiting area, sitting alone in a plastic chair, her cream sweater stained with something dark that made Julian's stomach turn. Blood. Their son's blood. "Charlotte?" he started. She looked up, and the expression on her face stopped him cold. It wasn't relief, it wasn't even anger. It was recognition. The worst kind. Charlotte stood slowly, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. The wrinkled clothes, the stubble, the unmistakable scent of another woman's perfume. Her face crumpled, then hardened into something Julian had never seen before. She crossed the distance between them and slapped him. The sound cracked through the quiet hallway like a gunshot. "Where were you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, shaking with rage. "Where were you?" Julian's hand went to his burning cheek. "Charlotte, I can explain. My phone died. I was in a meeting. I didn't." "Liar." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "I can smell her on you. I can smell her perfume. See the lipstick on your collar. See exactly where you were." Julian looked down. A faint red smudge marked his white shirt, evidence he'd been too drunk and careless to notice. "Our son," Charlotte's voice broke. "Our baby was hit by a car. He coded twice on the operating table. They didn't know if he'd make it through the hour. And I called you 7 times, Julian. I left voicemails begging you to come. I didn't know, I swear, I didn't, because you were too busy screwing your mistress to answer." The words came out like venom. "While Adrian was fighting for his life, you were with her. While I was signing consent forms with our son's blood on my hands, you were ignoring my calls because they were inconvenient." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. "I needed you. For once in our entire marriage, I actually needed you. And you chose her." Julian reached for her, but Charlotte recoiled like he'd burned her. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me with the same hands you—" She couldn't finish, disgust twisting her features. "Charlotte, please. I love you. I love Adrian. This was a mistake. A mistake." She laughed, bitter and broken. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is being late for dinner. Ignoring your wife's emergency calls while your child is dying so you can finish fucking your mistress? That's not a mistake, Julian. That's a choice." The surgery doors opened behind them. A doctor emerged, still in blood-stained scrubs. "Mrs. Cross?" Charlotte turned away from Julian without another word, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, the scent of Lexi's perfume suddenly nauseating, the truth of what he'd done finally, brutally, crashing down on him. He'd chosen wrong, and he might have just lost everything that actually mattered. Adrian stabilized at dawn. The surgery had lasted 6 hours. 6 hours Charlotte spent alone in that waiting room while Julian paced the hallway like a caged animal, too ashamed to sit beside her, too guilty to leave. When Dr. Patel finally emerged with cautious optimism, Adrian was alive, critical but stable. Charlotte didn't cry with relief. She didn't reach for Julian's hand. She simply nodded, thanked the doctor, and walked to the private waiting room without looking back. Julian followed because he didn't know what else to do. The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt like a cell locking. "How long?" Charlotte's voice was eerily calm. Julian's throat tightened. "Charlotte? How long?" He couldn't meet her eyes. 6 months. The number hung in the air between them like poison. 6 months of lies. 6 months of hotel rooms and declined calls. 6 months while Charlotte ate dinner alone and put their son to bed by herself and waited for a husband who was choosing someone else. "What's her name? Does it matter?" "What's her name, Julian?" Lexi Hart." His voice cracked. She owns an art gallery. It was just physical, Charlotte. It didn't mean anything. I never meant for didn't mean anything. Charlotte's laugh was hollow. You ignored your dying son's emergency for something that didn't mean anything? You let me beg you through voicemails while our child bled out in the street for something that didn't mean anything? I didn't know about Adrian. If I'd known, you would have what? Answered? You've been ignoring my calls for months, Julian. Every time I needed you, every time I tried to tell you something important, you were too busy handling business. Her voice turned razor sharp. Except the business you were handling was her. Julian reached for her, desperate. I'm sorry. God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I'll end it. Right now, I'll never see her again. We can fix this. Fix this? Charlotte pulled the pregnancy test from her purse and threw it at his chest. It bounced off and clattered to the floor between them. Julian stared at it, his world tilting. You're 3 months pregnant, Charlotte said, her voice breaking for the first time. I found out 3 weeks ago. I tried to tell you at dinner, the dinner you left to handle something. I tried to tell you over the phone, the calls you sent to voicemail. I left the test on our bathroom counter for 3 days, and you never even noticed because you barely come home anymore. Julian's knees felt weak. Another child, another life he'd been destroying while chasing temporary escape. Charlotte, please. I want a divorce. The words landed like a bullet. No, you don't mean that. We can work through this. For Adrian, for the baby. Charlotte pulled off her wedding ring, the platinum band Julian had slid onto her finger 7 years ago when he'd promised to love and protect her forever, and threw it at his chest. I'm pregnant with your second child, and you chose her over us. Over your son's life. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice stayed strong. You don't get to come back from this, Julian. You don't get to fix this with apologies and promises. You had your chance to choose us, and you chose her. Julian's phone rang in his pocket. The sound felt obscene in the silence. He pulled it out with shaking hands. Lexi's name flashed on the screen. Charlotte's eyes locked on it. Answer it. Charlotte, answer it. Show me who you really are. Show me what you'll choose when it matters. Julian stared at the phone, Lexi's name pulsing like an accusation. Everything in him wanted to throw it against the wall, to prove it to Charlotte he was choosing her. But his hand was frozen, the phone vibrating against his palm. That's what I thought, Charlotte whispered. Something broke inside Julian. He turned the phone off completely, not silent, off, and dropped it on the chair beside him. I choose you. I choose our family. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm begging you. You're begging me? Charlotte's voice rose. I begged you to come home for dinner. I begged you to answer your phone. I begged you to care about our son's health. And you ignored every single plea because they weren't convenient for you. She grabbed her purse, her whole body shaking. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce. You can see Adrian when he's stable enough for visitors. But I don't want you near me. I don't want your apologies or your promises or your guilt. I want you gone. Charlotte, please. I love you. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him with eyes that held nothing but exhaustion. If you loved me, you would have answered the phone. The door closed behind her. Julian stood alone in the empty room, his son fighting for life down the hall, his wife carrying his child and walking away, his phone dark and silent in his hand. He'd built an empire on calculated decisions and ruthless control, and he'd just lost everything that mattered because of one catastrophically selfish choice. Smash that like button if you believe ignoring your wife's emergency calls while your son is dying is unforgivable. Only heartless people will scroll past this. Julian met Lexi at her apartment the next morning. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, had spent the entire night sitting in his car outside the hospital, watching the window of Adrian's ICU room, too ashamed to go inside. Lexi opened the door in silk pajamas, her smile fading when she saw his face. Jillian, what's wrong? We're done. The words came out flat, final. Whatever this was, it's over. Her face went pale. What? Because your wife found out? Jillian, she'll calm down. Give her time to... My son almost died yesterday. His voice cracked. He was hit by a car, and I wasn't there. I wasn't there because I was with you, ignoring her calls while he bled out in the street. Lexi's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, Julian, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could you? I was too busy pretending my real life didn't exist. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and set it on her counter. There's $50,000 in there, enough to cover your gallery's expenses for the next few months. Consider it severance. Severance? Tears welled in her eyes. I'm not some employee you're firing. I thought this meant something. It didn't, not really. Julian forced himself to meet her eyes. You were right when you said I kept one foot in both worlds. I used you as an escape from my responsibilities. That wasn't fair to you, and it destroyed my family. So you're choosing her? The woman who hates you now? I'm choosing my children. Charlotte's pregnant, Lexi. 3 months. I have another child coming, and I've been so busy running from my life that I didn't even notice. Lexi wiped her tears angrily. She'll never take you back. You know that, right? You're throwing away what we had for someone who's already walking away. Julian's hand shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, the same phone he'd turned off in front of Charlotte. I know she might not take me back, but my son needs his father. And I've never been that. I've been a provider, a name on a birth certificate, a ghost in a penthouse, but I've never been present. He deleted Lexi's contact information while she watched, then blocked her number. I need to become someone worth forgiving. Even if Charlotte never forgives me, I need to be the father my children deserve. Julian. Goodbye, Lexi. He walked out before she could respond, before his resolve could weaken, before he could run back to the easy escape she represented. That afternoon, Julian sat across from his attorney in a conference room that suddenly felt suffocating. You want to transfer how much? Michael Brennan looked at him like he'd lost his mind. 60% of my liquid assets, the penthouse, the vacation property in Aspen, all of it goes to Charlotte, completely untouchable by me or the business. Julian, that's over $40 million. If you're trying to influence the divorce settlement, I'm not. Julian's voice was steady for the first time in days. I'm giving her freedom, real freedom. So when she decides whether to divorce me, it's not because she's financially trapped. It's her genuine choice. This is financial suicide. No, ignoring my son's emergency to sleep with my mistress was suicide. This is me trying to give my wife one honest thing in a marriage built on my lies. Michael stared at him for a long moment, then began drafting the paperwork. Julian moved out of the penthouse that evening. Not because Charlotte asked, she hadn't spoken to him since the hospital, but because staying felt like trespassing in a life he'd already destroyed. He checked into the same hotel where he'd spent weekends with Lexi. The irony wasn't lost on him. In the sterile room, he pulled out a notebook and began writing. Dear Adrian, you're 6 years old, and you almost died while your father was choosing selfish pleasure over you. You'll probably never forgive me for that. I'm not sure I'll ever forgive myself, but I need you to know I'm going to change, not with words, with action, every single day for the rest of my life. His hands shook as he wrote, tears blurring the ink. I love you, and I'm so sorry I haven't shown you that. He wrote a second letter to the child Charlotte was carrying, a child who would be born into the wreckage of Julian's choices. Then he opened his laptop and searched for therapists who specialized in narcissistic behavior and emotional neglect. Because Lexi was right about one thing. Charlotte might never take him back, but Julian Cross was going to spend the rest of his life becoming a man who deserved the family he'd thrown away, even if he had to do it from a distance. Julian arrived at Chicago Memorial at 5:43 a.m., 3 hours before Adrian's scheduled surgery. He looked like hell, unshaven, dark circles carved beneath his eyes, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from yesterday because he'd forgotten he didn't live at the penthouse anymore. He found Charlotte already in the surgical waiting area, staring at nothing, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, surprise flickering in her exhausted eyes. What are you doing here? He's my son. Julian's voice was rough from lack of sleep. I should have been here from the beginning. I'm here now. Charlotte turned away, but she didn't tell him to leave. They sat in silence as the morning crept forward. Nurses came and went. Other families filled the waiting room with their own anxieties. Julian wanted to say 1,000 things, but every word felt inadequate against the weight of what he'd done. At 8:47 a.m., they wheeled Adrian past on a gurney. He was awake, groggy from pre-op medication, his small hand reaching out when he saw them. Daddy? His voice was so small, so hopeful. Julian's heart shattered. He grabbed Adrian's hand, walking alongside the gurney. I'm right here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere. You promise? Julian's throat closed. He'd broken so many promises. But this one he would keep even if it killed him. I promise, Daddy's staying right here until you wake up. They reached the surgical doors. Julian kissed his son's forehead, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and childhood innocence, and watched them wheel him away. When he turned back, Charlotte was crying silently, her arms wrapped around herself. Julian didn't think. He just pulled her into his chest, and for a moment, one fragile, broken moment, she let him. Her body shook with sobs she'd been holding back for days, and Julian held her like he should have held her all along. He's going to be okay, Julian whispered into her hair. He's strong, like his mother. Charlotte pulled away, wiping her eyes. Don't act like... I'm not acting. Julian's voice cracked. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything. But I need you to know I'm not leaving. Not the hospital, not their lives, not yours. Even if you divorce me, even if you hate me forever, I'll be at every birthday, every school play, every single moment I can. Charlotte stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the angle, for the manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. Words are easy, Julian. I know, that's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just asking you to let me prove it. Before Charlotte could respond, Dr. Patel burst through the surgical doors, still in scrubs, her face grim. We have a complication. Adrian's bleeding won't stop. We need to try a riskier procedure. It could save him, but there's a 15% chance of stroke or permanent brain damage. Charlotte's face went white. I don't... We need consent now, Mrs. Cross. Every second counts. Charlotte looked at Julian, panic flooding her eyes. I can't make this decision. What if I choose wrong? What if... Julian took her hand, his grip steady and sure. He turned to Dr. Patel. Do it. Whatever gives him the best chance of survival, do it now. Mr. Cross, save our son. His voice didn't waver. We trust you. Patel nodded and disappeared back through the doors. Charlotte collapsed into a chair, her breathing ragged. Julian sat beside her, still holding her hand. What if you just killed him, she whispered. Then we'll carry that together. But doing nothing would definitely kill him. Julian's thumb traced circles on her palm, an old gesture from when they were first married, when comfort between them was natural. He's a fighter, he gets that from you. Have you ever wondered where you're watching from? Julian asked suddenly, his voice distant. Sometimes I think about all the moments I missed, all the places I should have been. Charlotte didn't answer, but her hand tightened around his. They sat like that for 2 hours, not talking, not forgiving, just present in the worst moment of their lives, together for the first time in months. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, her mask pulled down, exhausted but smiling, Julian felt Charlotte's entire body sag with relief. He made it. The bleeding stopped. He's stable. Charlotte burst into tears, and this time when Julian pulled her close, she didn't pull away. She didn't forgive him, but she didn't let go either. And for Julian, that small mercy felt like the first step on an impossibly long road home. 8 months later, the house on Maple Street looked nothing like the penthouse. No marble floors, no floor-to-ceiling windows, just a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes in the street and neighbors knew each other's names. Charlotte had bought it with the assets Julian transferred to her, a fresh start away from the gilded cage of their old life. In the backyard, Julian threw a foam football to Adrian, who'd made a miraculous recovery. The scar on his temple was fading, hidden beneath hair that desperately needed cutting. His laugh, God, his laugh filled the autumn air like a symphony Julian had forgotten existed. "Good catch, buddy," Julian called, as Adrian snagged the ball one-handed. "Did you see that, Dad? The coach says I'm getting really good." "I saw. You're incredible." Julian's throat tightened. He'd missed Adrian's first 3 games this season while he was still drowning in guilt in hotel rooms. But he'd made every single game since. Front row, cheering louder than any other parent. His phone rang in his pocket. He pulled it out. Marcus, his head of security. Territory dispute on the south side. The kind of crisis that 8 months ago would have sent him racing out the door without a second thought. Adrian's smile faltered. "Do you have to go?" Julian looked at his son's face, that flicker of fear, of preparing for disappointment, of bracing for another broken promise. The same expression Adrian had worn for years, while Julian chose everything else over him. Julian declined the call and shoved the phone back in his pocket. "Nope, nothing is more important than this." Adrian's face lit up like Julian had just handed him the world. "Really? Really? Now go long. I'm going to test that arm of yours." Inside, Charlotte stood at the kitchen window, gently rocking 8-week-old Emma against her shoulder. The baby had Julian's dark hair and Charlotte's eyes, a perfect blend of the love they'd once had and the fragile hope they were rebuilding. She watched Julian in the yard, his shirt untucked, grass stains on his jeans, playing with their son like he had nowhere else to be, because he didn't. For 8 months, Julian had shown up, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, just presence. Every doctor's appointment for Adrian's recovery, Julian was there. Every 2 a.m. feeding when Emma wouldn't settle, Julian appeared at her door asking if he could help. Every school pickup, every bedtime story, every mundane moment that actually built a life, Julian was present. He'd sold his stake in half his operations, promoted trusted people to handle day-to-day business, attended therapy twice a week and actually did the work. He'd moved into a small apartment 10 minutes away, close enough to be available, far enough to respect her space. He never pushed, never demanded forgiveness, just kept showing up, day after day, proving with action what his words had destroyed. The back door opened, and Julian stepped inside, covered in grass stains and grinning. "I ordered pizza. Adrian's choice." He paused. "Hope that's okay." Charlotte smiled softly. "You missed an important call." Julian's expression didn't change. "I didn't miss anything important." Something broke open in Charlotte's chest, the last piece of wall she'd been holding between them. She crossed the kitchen, Emma still in her arms, and kissed him gently. Julian froze, hardly daring to breathe. "I love you," Charlotte whispered against his lips. "And I trust you again." Julian's face crumpled. He wrapped his arms around both of them, his body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for 8 months. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning that," he choked out. "I swear to God, Charlotte, I'll never—" "I know." She pulled back, wiping tears from his face. "I believe you now." Adrian burst through the door. "Pizza's here!" Can we eat in the living room and watch a movie? Charlotte laughed. Just this once. They spread out on the living room floor. Adrian sprawled on his stomach, Emma in her bassinet, Julian and Charlotte sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. The pizza was mediocre, the movie was a kid's superhero thing Julian had seen 17 times, and the living room was too small for all of them. It was perfect. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. He didn't even glance at it. Adrian noticed, his eyes flicking to Julian's pocket, then back to his face. Dad, your phone can wait, Julian said, pulling his son closer. Everything can wait. Charlotte rested her head on Julian's shoulder. Watching their children, the son who'd survived, the daughter who represented second chances. The family Julian had almost destroyed and then fought like hell to deserve. Welcome home, she whispered. Julian kissed her forehead, his arms wrapped around the only empire that actually mattered. And for the first time in years, Julian Cross was exactly where he was supposed to be. If you're on Charlotte's side and believe she deserves better than a man who ghosts his family, drop a comment saying she deserves better. But if you believe in second chances earned through real change, comment, redemption is possible. Let's see where you stand. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. Julian didn't even feel it, because nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever matter more than this moment. If this story broke your heart and then put it back together, if you felt Charlotte's pain when Julian ignored those calls, if you celebrated every small step he took toward becoming the man his family deserved, then this channel needs you. Subscribe if you believe family should always come first, before power, before pleasure, before pride. Only selfish people who would ignore their child's emergency for their own desires won't subscribe. Hit that like button if you stood with Charlotte through every tear, every lonely dinner, every moment she chose her children over her broken heart. Show the world you value loyalty, sacrifice, and real love over empty promises. And comment, family first. If you believe no empire, no mistress, no amount of power is worth losing the people who actually love you. Comment, second chances. If you believe redemption is possible when someone does the hard, unglamorous work of real change. Because here's the truth. There are too many Julians in this world, people who take their families for granted, who choose everything else over the ones who need them most, who don't realize what they have until it's bleeding out on an operating table. Don't be Julian at the beginning of this story. Be Julian at the end. Present, sacrificial, choosing what matters over what's convenient. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been a Charlotte, waiting for calls that never come. Someone who's been a Julian, realizing too late what they've destroyed. Someone who needs to remember that the most powerful thing a person can do is show up. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Stories that don't just entertain, they challenge us, break us, and remind us what actually matters when everything else is stripped away. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, put down your phone, call someone you love, be present, because you never know which ignored call will be the one that changes everything.